Hello, everyone. Super nice to see you here, and welcome to our live session brought to you by SDX Next, but most importantly, featuring Stuart Kelly from Zego. Stu, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be doing this. Thanks for agreeing to be on our show, which, by the way, has a name now, which I'm going to now announce to the world. Welcome to Tech Leaders Hub Fintech, episode 1. We've been doing these live sessions for a while, and we're going to be calling them Tech Leaders Hub from now on. But with this session, we're starting a new series, and it's going to be focused primarily on fintech, everything that falls under it. And in this case, the conversation is going to be around insurtech as well, right?
Okay, I'm honored to be number one.
And now you are, so I'm really glad that we get to do this. Okay, Stu, for a little while now, people are going to be trickling in, they're going to be joining in. If you're watching this from the very first minute, first of all, thank you. And second of all, if you can let us know that everything is working correctly, please leave a comment. Let us know that it's working all right. And we're coming to you live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter/Periscope. So you have really no excuse not to leave us a comment and let us know. While people are still joining in, Stu, I wanted to ask you, who do you hope is tuning in? Who's going to benefit from our conversation today?
I think today is really going to be for anyone either in a leadership role like a staff engineer or in more of a CTO role who is looking to retain some of their top engineering talent by providing with them with, I guess, a track to their career that is maybe more suited to someone with a technical background or someone who just wants to stay a little bit more on the technical rather than the business side of things.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really excited to talk about that. So 2 words of introduction is probably what I should start with. Stu, you're staff engineer at Zego right now, formerly CTO of Zego back when the company was first starting. So I want to get to that story very soon, but I have this little bit of a ritual that I like to go through first, and that's to deliver value up front, right? So your role right now as staff engineer, I was wondering if you could, share a piece of advice to a younger you or a piece of advice to somebody in a similar position. What would be your number one tip for people in this staff engineer role?
I think number one tip would be to practice your presentation skills and all of them. So whether that is delivering information one-on-one between you and a colleague, or a slide presentation or a talk, or even probably more importantly is learning to write stuff down coherently. A lot of what the job is going to entail is actually communicating ideas, and the more practice you can get at that, the better. Probably in the bits that you like doing the least. So if you're afraid of speaking in front of a group of people, you should probably practice speaking in front of a group of people as much as you can.
Yeah, and do you sometimes go on live streams to practice speaking in front of a group of people?
I quite enjoy speaking in front of a group of people. I need to practice my writing skills more than anything else.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting that you mentioned that. As a marketer, I would also say that communication skills are really important. So it's interesting that there's this overlap, right? And it really helps in all areas of life to be able to speak, to be able to write clearly and concisely. So I totally agree with you there. So thank you for sharing the tip, and I'm sure that's going to make for a great self-contained clip. But let's go back let's go back to Zego, and let's maybe start there. So it would be best probably in your own words if you could describe what Zego does, what is your product about. Feel free to gush about it as you see fit. So how would you explain that?
So Zego is an insurance company. We're a tech-enabled insurer company. Hence insurtech. And we started 4 years ago to solve one key problem, which was that insurance hadn't kept up to the way that modern businesses use their vehicles to make money. And so our initial niche was the gig economy, drivers and riders for Deliveroo who might have only wanted to work a couple of hours a week, but needed to pay for an annual 24/7 policy, which just didn't make sense. So we went to solve that problem. And then as we entered the insurance market, we decided this problem was everywhere. There were large fleets of companies who would have 100 vans on the road at Christmas time when they've got loads and loads of deliveries to do. But come summertime, half their vans were sitting in a car park somewhere. And yet they pay the same amount of insurance for all of those vans that are in the car park as they do at Christmas time when they're all driving around the road. And fundamentally, that didn't make sense. So we came in to build a full stack insurance company. So we do everything from the customer acquisition, the brokering, the pricing algorithms, all the way through to underwriting a number of policies ourselves. So really disrupting a centuries old market that hasn't kept up to date.
Okay. So I wonder, on a technological level, like what are you building to address this challenge? Can you say a little bit more about your solution?
Yeah. So part of building a modern insurance company is needing to build an awful lot of software to make that function. So a lot of what you can get off the shelf and a lot of the software that the more traditional insurance companies use is still very legacy. It was written 40 years ago, and as anyone who's written a lot of software knows, innovating on and iterating on very old software gets very hard. So we decided to start from scratch to build a policy management system that was flexible enough to handle policies that, like in some cases, are down to 3-4 minutes, if that's how long it takes you to do your drop for Deliveroo, all the way up to year-long policies that cover thousands of vehicles for an entire fleet. And so building a system that could manage that, and then with that comes all of the underlying systems. So we're building an entire platform of services to really nail down the insurance domain.
Okay, so if I'm understanding that correctly, using your solution, I could insure my vehicle even for 4 minutes at a time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And like we do that by having deep integrations with the partners that we work with. So like if you were, say, a Deliveroo rider, you wouldn't need to tell us the 4 minutes that you needed insurance. You just need to, with us and Deliveroo, link your accounts together, and then Deliveroo will tell us when you're working and when you're not. And for all the time that you are on a drop and you have some food and you need that insurance, we will make sure that you've got a policy in place that covers that. And then when you're not, you don't have a policy in place. Your standard social, like domestic policy, will cover you. So you're not paying for insurance that you're not actually using.
Okay, that sounds like it can be incredibly useful, and well, something that on some level makes me proud because, well, SDX Next is to some extent involved in building what you're building, and we're helping you out. So I'm glad that we can, together be making this change. But let's talk about your role in this whole process then. During our prep conversation that I keep referring to because it was pretty awesome and it got me fired up about this, we talked a little bit about your career path at Zego, right? Because one thing that's, I think, quite interesting is that you started as CTO at Zego. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that, into your career path, because you've seen Zego basically develop from a startup, I think day one, right, to where it is right now. So how did that go, and can you tell a little bit more about your career path and how your role at Zego changed over time?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think anyone who has been in a startup for this period of time will have seen the amount of change that goes on. And like I started as CTO. I wrote the first line of code back in June 2016. So we're getting close to 5 years now. And the role of a CTO when you're a very, very early stage company like that is to wear every single possible hat. I was the software engineer, I was the data engineer, I was tech ops, I was also investor relations, and I was also the IT support, and I was everything. And you need to be able to handle all of that. And then as the role, or as the business gets bigger and growth starts happening and you start to gain traction, you need to start delegating out parts of that role. And so the CTO role changes from needing to be able to do all of that yourself to a big part of it is hiring and needing to be able to hire people to come in and take over different aspects of that. It then continues to evolve as the company grows. So, 6 months, 12 months in, I was still looking quite a lot at technical architecture and still helping build out solutions and still occasionally writing code with the team. Occasionally, but the amount of code I was writing was dropping quite off because the more important aspects of that role were making sure that we had hiring plans that would scale us into the next year, making sure that the team we had like development frameworks and were getting the support that they needed, making sure that, you know, our funding, like the you know, we had the runway and that we weren't blowing through all of our cash on like infrastructure. And so all of these roles became a lot more important because they weren't ones I could delegate. And so started to move further and further away from the technical solutions that we were building. And I guess from my personal aspect, like that's going to be true for any startup, that like any CTO in any startup from the beginning. On a personal level, it got to, I guess, the start of 2019, middle of 2019, and like with a bit of self-reflection and self-awareness, I realized that I wasn't happy. And the reason I wasn't happy was because I had become so far removed from those technical solutions that was the bit that had been driving me. That was the bit that had, like, you know, I love building stuff. At the end of the day, like, I'm a software engineer. Software engineers love building stuff. And not getting to do that was, you know, making me like not content, not comfortable where I was. And I sat down and I had a really honest conversation, like with my co-founders, and I said, like, guys, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to be the CTO, and because I don't want to be the CTO, I'm going to be a really poor CTO. We need to find a CTO for the next stage of Zego, and that can't be me. And like, it's a very difficult conversation to have with people that you've worked really closely with and you're building this with. And they said, like, Stuart, is this you out? Like, do you want to leave? And I was like, I really don't. Like, that's the thing. Like, I've been building this company, and I've built this team, and I've built this group of people that I really want to work with. I just don't want to do that anymore. I want to do this other role over here. I want to do this other stuff that I'm really good at and that I enjoy and that is also still really beneficial to the business. So I had been talking with Vicky Wills to have her come on and help me, and realized that really I think I had originally planned to hire her as a head of engineering and stay as CTO. And like, in reality, I was just going to give her all of the CTO jobs and do the stuff that I wanted to do. And I'm like, this doesn't work. So I don't know if she's forgiven me for this, but on day one, I sat her down and told her that I was stepping down as CTO, and that she was now the boss.
Okay.
And I did it over breakfast. I did wait until she started so she couldn't back out. But I sat her down and told her she was now the boss. And we made it work. She has absolutely nailed it. Like, she's been an amazing CTO for Zego in this and future stages of where we're at. And with her, I sat down and we started to carve out, like, this role that I've been pointing at, this work that I love doing. What is that called? And because we probably need more than just me doing that as we scale the business. And so we really like tried to identify what kind of support a staff engineer could give the development team. And that's how we carved out this role. And we've since hired, we've now got 4 staff engineers. We're still hiring. So we're trying to hire more people into that staff engineering role.
Okay. Well, there's lots to follow up on here, and I do want to talk about your new role and, you know, some of the other frameworks for that you have at Zego. But I did have a follow-up question for what you said earlier, because, you know, you mentioned that you had this this honest conversation that wasn't so easy to have. So I'm wondering, you know, what was in your mind? What gave you kind of the confidence to have that conversation in the first place? Because what I'm suspecting, and maybe this is pure fantasy, what I'm suspecting is there are other CTOs that are in a similar position who maybe are hesitant to have that kind of conversation. So what gave you the confidence to take that step?
So I have and have and still have a really great relationship with Harry and Sten, my co-founders, and we had already done it once. So we said from the very, very beginning, like, you know, if the 3 of us aren't the right people for a role that we're in, then we owe it to ourselves and the business to like change. And that either means changing ourselves or it means like getting other people in. And Harry and Sten had swapped roles earlier, about a year earlier.
I see.
Where when we started the business, Harry was the CEO. And again, like, the role of a CEO when you're a like pre-seed stage company is like absolutely perfect for what Harry loves doing and Harry's skill sets. And then as we got some funding and we got into like, hey, we've now like got this engine going and we need to just like pump it and get it up to full speed. Harry was like, that's not the bit that I'm enjoying or that I'm good at. And Sten's like, well, that is the bit that I enjoy and that I'm good at. So like Sten stepped up as CEO and Harry moved into a role that was much more to his skill set of like, investing and finding great investors and finding great partners to work with and finding great carriers. And less about the operational side of the business. So knowing that we had already gone through that phase once and that had been successful, gave me the confidence that like, hey, we can go through this phase. I just can't make Harry or Sten the CTO because they're not that technical.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So that's one part of the story that I didn't know. It reminds me of a conversation that I was listening to just a few days ago, actually, with the CEO of Spotify. And at Spotify, if I can do just a little bit of a tangent, because I think it's relevant here, they have this concept of missions. I don't know if you heard about that, in that they don't think of roles as permanent, but rather they, when the CEO talks with his direct reports, for example, he mentions that, I don't know, your role is X, right? And your mission is to achieve this aspirational goal. And after 2 years on this mission, we're going to reevaluate. And like it's built into the system that these roles are not thought of as permanent. So I think in that sense, because there was precedent, then it kind of made it more okay to have that conversation. So I wish more companies would think about it this way, just on a personal level, because companies change, and a role that's titled, for example, CEO. I mean, that role has so different faces at different stages of a company's development. So this really speaks to me. Okay, so getting back to where we left off with the story then. So you decided it's time for a change, and you were speaking with Vicky. And at this point, when we were preparing for this, I believe you mentioned you mentioned this concept that I'm really excited about, which is these 5 levels of support that developers and just employees in general need. So could you please just lay it out, because I think it's super interesting. Sure. What are these 5 levels of support?
So I will talk about it in the context of software engineers, but sure, the reality is it's for anyone who has a job to do. And so number 1 is your visionary support, like the large long-term strategic direction, which it comes from the C-level. So for a software engineer, you would expect to get that from your CTO. And that's kind of like the big picture why, like what is our North Star? Like why existentially, why are we all here? And the second level becomes very much your product support. So I would expect to get this from a product function, a product team, sometimes a tech lead. But that is what is the problem we're solving and who are we solving it for? Mm-hmm. How do we prioritize? Like, what is the biggest problem right now? And so that's kind of like the what are we doing? Like, what is our problem? You need your day-to-day support, which is very much who is helping me get shit done. So it's like, who's looking after the backlog, who's like making sure that we've got tickets groomed, who is unblocking me, who do I go to if like for whatever reason my pull requests aren't getting code reviewed fast enough for me to get some features out. Okay. That's very much your like delivery manager or scrum master. Like there's a different name for that role, but it's your like the sprint support for your day-to-day. The 4th level is your career support. So anyone who has a job to do, anyone who's in a career is looking at their own development as part of it. I used to say that I don't expect anyone to be working at Zego who's currently here in 30 years' time. I expect people to come into Zego and do great work while they're here, and Zego will invest in these people, but eventually they're going to leave. Okay. And when they leave, I want them to leave better at whatever it is that they do than when they joined. And then we'll both gain the benefit from that. So that, like, how do we get people from like here to here is your engineering manager, as the person who's having their one-on-ones with you every single week. That's the person who you can go to and say, like, I just feel like I'm stagnating or I'm not getting challenged enough. Or conversely, I feel like I'm not getting the support I need in order to be able to get all of my stuff done. And then lastly, it's this idea of like the staff engineer. So this is I know like why I'm doing something. I know what I'm doing and what the priorities are. I know like when I need to do it in terms of my sprint, but what is the best way to get this done? How should I like do this task?
So it's about the how.
And it's about the how. It's about like your technical mentor, your technical leadership. And that's really what the role of a staff engineer is. It's being that person for the squads that you're looking after, so that they have someone to go to. They have someone who can step in and say, like, guys, this is not like going to scale, or this is not the best way of going about this. And they are technically some of the best engineers on the team, but they don't always have to be the best engineers on the team. Like I said, it's very much a leadership role as much as it is a technical role. And so you need to be able to bring people along with you on a journey. That's why at the start I said, like, practice your presentation skills in whatever format they are, because you will be presenting arguments to software engineers. You will be mediating arguments between software engineers. You'll be mediating arguments between software engineers and product managers, and between the leadership team and another part of the leadership team. And like, your job is to be the technical expert in the room.
I see.
So
I'm really sure. Go on.
No, I was going to say, like, that's, if you've got those levels of support, then as a person who sits down like on a Wednesday to do their job, you go, no matter what question you've got, I know who I'm going to go and ask.
Okay, so putting it all together in terms of the move that you made, it was from, I'm trying to kind of make an accurate statement here, from as a CTO, was it more level 1 or level 2? Were you more focused on the why and the vision of it all? Or was it more focused on the what?
So when I was at the CTO level, it was much more around like the broader picture why, like, what are we doing as a business and why are we all here? And what that meant was that I was stepping further and further away from the, like, how should we go about solving this? Like, let's sit down and brainstorm it together and work it out and help people do all that. And like, I got away with it because I had people I trusted, but I missed it. And that's what I wanted to do. And like, often all of these levels of support don't come from necessarily 5 different people, especially when you're a young company. So like, at one point, the role of a CTO was all 5 levels of that support for people. There's a time where you're wearing all of those hats, and as you scale out a team and as you get more and more people, then a bigger and bigger business, the chance of you being able to effectively wear all of those hats as one person becomes like nil. And so you have to start working out which of those hats you're going to take off.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm really curious now, focusing back to the staff engineer role then, because that's what you're currently involved in. And I'm thinking of, people joining in who might have a similar role or similar aspiration. Maybe they are thinking of making a similar change. So how do you go about your, day-to-day responsibilities? You mentioned, for example, mediating conversations between developers or developers and product managers. So do you have any particular tips or steps on how to do this right? Or what is your approach?
I mean, everybody's approach is going to be very, very different.
Sure.
I would say the key part is about matching your style to what people need. And so this will depend an awful lot on the people you're talking to. The way that I will discuss a problem with a junior developer is probably very different than the way I would discuss a problem with a senior developer. So that sort of being able to diagnose where the room is in terms of how they're thinking about a problem, and being able to change your style of leadership to match that is in itself a really important leadership skill.
Sure.
I would say that doesn't come naturally to probably almost anybody. We do a lot of work at Zego, making sure that anyone in a leadership position gets the training they need to be able to do that sort of stuff effectively.
Okay, yeah, this is something that really speaks to me. And, in terms of matching your style, I always found that quite, challenging. For example, in my case, I like to think have a certain style and it's a fit with some people, maybe not a fit with certain other people. So I find it really, impressive to meet people who are able to switch up their styles and to actually find ways to fit different kinds of people in different kinds of situations. So I think that's a very valuable tip, just from my perspective. And I do lead a small team myself, so thanks for mentioning that. It gives me a lot of food for thought. Like the 5 levels concept, just in general, gives me a lot of food for thought. So I was wondering if we could dig into the role a little bit deeper still. So I'm still trying to build a picture here of what you're involved in day to day. And let me ask a question like this then. Like, when you're thinking about your current to-do list, what is the hardest thing on that list right now? What is the thing that, that's, well, probably important, right?
Okay, so
but difficult to tackle.
I'll go with like what is the hardest part of the job, and that will probably explain why
Sure,
my to-do list is such a mess. I would say probably the hardest part of any job is context switching. And so you talk to most people and you're like, hey, what is it that slows you down? And they'll say, oh, I end up having to context switch. And for a lot of people, that's, I'm working on 3 different projects at the same time, and I need to like take all of that bit out of my head and bring all of this bit into my head.
Yeah.
One of them, like, I guess the most insidious types of context switching is actually looking at your horizons. So if you're a software engineer, you are probably very much focused on like the ticket that you're working on at the moment, with like a half focus on the current sprint and how much work you've got to do in the current sprint. And maybe occasionally you've got half an eye on your like Q2 OKRs to see whether or not you're tracking in the right direction. But that's about as far as you should have to go. So if you're that focused on like, what am I doing in this current sprint and this current ticket and this current pull request, and somebody comes to you and says, and how does this marry up with where we need to be in 18 months time? Like, your brain is just going you hang on, I don't even know where we're supposed to be in 18 months time. Like, I've got a very vague picture of it, but try and like take this function, this line of code that I've just written, and ask me whether or not that's going to work in 18 months time. Like, I don't know the answer to that. And that is a difficult thing to do. So a lot of the role of being a staff engineer is being able to focus on that level of context switching.
I see.
So to make sure that like I am the one who is looking out 18 months, 2 years ahead, understanding what the business goals are for 18 months and 2 years in time, and where I think we need to be technically, whether that's at an architecture level, an infrastructure level, or even just like, what are the tools and processes we're going to have in place? Because I know that for us to get there, we're going to go from like a team of 80 something that we are now to a team of 200. And what falls over when we have a team of 200? It's like, oh, guess what? Our CI/CD pipelines are not going to cope with that, because we're currently pushing 15 deployments a day, and we're maxing out on that. So it's like, well, hang on, how are we going to triple the size of the team? We need to be able to get to 45 deployments a day. So how do we get there? And so it's like understanding these kind of problems, and knowing that like that's where we need to get to. So how do I enable the teams today to continue to focus on this task, this function, this line of code, but give them guidance in the right direction? And I think guidance is probably one of the key points there, because this, like, the staff engineer role is not a dictatorial type role. I don't get to tell anybody what to do. And like, I like that, but it means that my job becomes trying to make a path of least resistance so that people go in that direction. Like, to use an analogy, if you're walking sort of through the bush, you don't get to tell anyone, like, this is how you get from point A to point B. But I'm going to go this way, and I've got a big machete, and I'm going to clear a nice, easy path. And if you want to follow that nice, easy path, then you can. But if you also want to go off on this other path, then go on that path, and I'm going to be right there next to you, if that's the way you would rather go. So it's about like that level of influence and guidance, rather than like, I get to draw a pretty diagram and then tell everybody, go, you have to do exactly what I say.
It sounds like you have to really take care of the balance between, the direction that you have in mind, but also the individual developers' opinions here.
Yeah, I would never want to take autonomy away from the developers. Like, we hire incredibly smart people, and that means that we hire people who will come up with solutions that I haven't thought of. Like, it would be so arrogant of me to think that I'm always going to come up with the best solution all the time. And so involving our tech leads, involving our software engineers in the process, and saying, like, this is where we need to get to, and I'll be very clear on that. I'll be like, this is the end goal, and I think this is probably the best way to go about it. But if they turn around and go, yeah, I see that, but I don't think that the team are going to get bought onto that idea, or that feels like a lot of extra work now, and we're getting pushed really hard to meet these short-term goals, so I think we should go this other route instead. I'm like, okay, great, let's go this other route, and we'll make sure that that works.
Okay, so I was wondering, I still am thinking about this bush and you with that big machete just, swinging away. So how does that translate to, actual steps that you're taking? How do you create this path of, let's say, least resistance, that seems, I don't know, enticing to follow? I would take that path, for example, because I would want to be swinging the machete all the time, right? So how does that translate to actual steps that you do?
So a lot of that comes down to, like, helping the team by building, like, tools, frameworks, putting examples and documentation in place, and whether that's a proof of concept, or we at the moment are breaking apart parts of our large monolith and building it into a more service-orientated architecture. And we could say to the team, like, okay, cool, we're going to build service-orientated architecture, and here are the domains and here are the services, go away and build it. Or we could turn around and say, yeah, like, our goal is to get to this service-oriented architecture. And we've taken a service. We've not taken any of, like, the super interesting services that everybody wanted to build. We've taken this one boring service and we've made that. And as part of making that, we've solved a whole bunch of these problems. How do we deploy a service? How do we get a service into the staging environment? What is the core bits of functionality that are going to be shared across lots of services? Can we stick that in a library so that, like, then when it comes time to say, like, right, guys, you're in charge of pricing, you now need to build a pricing service, they can be like, cool, I can go away and do that myself and use all of these bits and pieces that, like, Stuart has put in place for me. And so that's kind of like the least resistance. If they turned around and said, okay, cool, but we don't want to use that framework, we want to use, like, this other library, or we want to do X, Y, and Z instead, then, like, the answer is going to be cool. Like, okay, so let's work out how we get that into the parts that aren't negotiable. So, if somebody turned around and said, like, we're currently your host on AWS. If somebody turned around and, yeah, we're going to build our own service and we're going to host it on Google Cloud, I'm going to be like, no. Like, at that point, it's just going to be like, no, that's, like, fundamentally not negotiable. Your services have to be running on AWS, and probably within our Kubernetes cluster. So, that doesn't necessarily dictate how they go about building their service inside that cluster, though.
So there are still some boundaries that you have to enforce, but within those, you create the path of least resistance, but you also give autonomy and freedom.
Yeah, and those boundaries are quite often built with the entire team. So to give another example of one of those boundaries, and one that we are, like, pushing against at the moment to see whether or not it's the right boundary, is that all of our services are currently written in Python. And we started with Python. Python's a great language.
It is. we love it at SDX.
Yeah, I love it. It's it has limitations. Like, it's not a statically typed compiled language, which means you get a whole class of errors in Python that a compiler would shout at you about in another language. And for some of the stuff we have to do, that sort of really strong statically typed compiled language might be really useful. So should we look at introducing a new language, not rewriting everything in Python, but just having the opportunity for services to be built in one of two or three different languages? And if so, what should those languages be? And our job as staff engineers is really to play both sides. Like, what are all the pros of doing that? Because there are a lot of them. And also, what are all the cons of doing that? Because there are a lot of those too. And so it's about presenting all of these arguments. And that's, like, these arguments are not just technical. So the engineering managers team are involved in this, because they are the ones who are working on like, how do we go about sourcing out the team and resourcing and hiring and making sure we've got the right people in the right squads. And if we suddenly say, hey, by the way, we're rewriting everything in Scala, and the engineering management team are like, well, we haven't even started looking or hiring Scala devs, and we don't have anyone in the team who likes Scala, and like, so all of these things are combined within the wider engineering leadership team. And we actually ran a debate. We ran a live debate where we pulled. So there was myself, our CTO Vicky, our head of engineering Sean, and one of the other staff engineers. And was there 4 of us? 3 of us? There might have been more than that. Now I can't even remember. But we drew names out of a hat. So this wasn't like everyone just gets to pick their favorite argument. We drew names out of a hat as to, this is the, like, either for or against, and which half of the argument you're on. And we had to argue live in front of the entire engineering team as to the pros and cons of doing this, which was just a really fantastic way of like helping everybody see, like, these are the thought processes and these are the things that are going on at a level that doesn't like immediately impact the ticket that they're working on or the sprint that they're working on, but does have a wider, longer term impact on the role and the business here.
Wow, that's great. And you're answering a lot of the follow-up questions that I was going to have. Like, for example, how do you arrive at that decision? So instead of asking that, because you kind of answered that, and the answer is fantastic. I was never expecting a live debate. Why did you decide for that kind of process? Was it in the spirit of transparency, or were there other factors at play here?
I mean, we are very strong on transparency. So I think there was a big part of it that was, we are having this debate internally in an engineering leadership meeting. Is there anything about this that we wouldn't want to hide, or that we wouldn't want everyone else in the engineering team to know about? It's like, no. So it's like, right, well, how do we do this in a way that we can involve everybody and we can get input from everybody without it turning into like, everybody gets to speak to everybody all at the same time. Like, you can't, the team is too big for that at the moment. So a live debate with, like, Zoom has a fancy poll feature now, so we were like having running polls throughout the debate, just to get a feel of the room and see sort of how things were going, and it just worked. I think we'll do it again if we have more sort of like controversial type topics where there is strong like pros and cons on either side. I think probably my favorite part was the fact that we didn't know which side we were going to be arguing on.
Right.
Because it meant that, like, as the debaters, we had to prepare both arguments. Like, we had to prepare for all sides of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great practice, right? It keeps you from being one-sided and from making kind of polarized for and against. So yeah, that sounds really smart.
And if you do it well, nobody can tell what your actual opinion is, because that wasn't the point. The point was not like, does Stuart think we should be doing X, Y, and Z? It's does everybody actually understand what the pros and cons of this are?
Yeah, and then it also detaches it from what possibly might be happening in some cases, is where I might not necessarily agree with your opinion, but because I like you as a person, I'm gonna go in that direction. I think that prevents that.
From memory, my team won the debate, and I'd like to think that it was a popularity contest and I won.
Okay.
No. I think it was just you're right. Like, doing that really does detach your own ego and your own opinion from what become just the facts.
Okay. Yeah. So all of that is really, really fascinating. I kind of still digesting it in my head. There's one thing that I wanted to follow up from earlier, unless there was something you wanted to add to this.
No.
I just love listening.
Shoot, you keep going.
Okay, so the picture that's in my mind is that you're thinking a lot about the future. You're thinking a lot about this, long time horizon of 18 months from now. So to me, the challenge involved with that is, well, it's difficult to know what the world is going to be like, what the tech landscape is going to be like so much time from now. So I'm really curious, how do you actually make these judgments? How do you actually decide, in your daily work on a direction? How do you get, a large degree of confidence that this is the right direction that will serve us well, even 18 months from now? What do you use as input? What's your decision-making process? Tell me everything.
So what do we use as input? Like, a lot of it is research. A lot of it is research and trying to marry up like what are the technology trends, and how do those fit with like the market trends. So as a business, we stay like very, very in touch with what the markets are doing. I didn't go fully into like the whole history, but when we started in 2016, like the world thought that everybody was going to go gig economy. They thought like, boy, within 10 years, every single job is going to be like the equivalent of a gig economy. And that was like a big, like there was a lot of people who were really like bullish on it. And we've seen that market shift. So over the last few years, we've started to see, Uber drivers like petitioning for more rights and being classed as employees or workers rather than self-contractors. And as a market, we've seen a similar shift where we now have sort of some of the large partners we talk to saying, cool, we want to like try and work out a model where we provide the insurance that our drivers need. And so that shift from like a very B2C type of focus to a very B2B focus has been a big part of Zego's just watching the landscape and watching our market and just listening to our customers, listening to our partners and doing that research. So understanding that and knowing that like with our latest round of funding, so we just closed our Series C and we're going to be using that to really focus the business on serving this sort of new style fleet customer who very much like our early customers were being completely underserved by the insurance market. These new style fleets are also being completely underserved by the products that are out there for them.
I find it interesting that even though we were just talking about technology choices, that ultimately it all ties back to the industry and to what's happening there, and that's something that you also need to kind of keep in mind is the technology is ultimately supposed to serve the customers, so we need to know what's happening in the industry.
Yeah, nobody gets to build tech for tech's sake. Like it's you could stay cutting edge and you could stay bleeding edge and you could work on the latest greatest technology. If you're not solving a problem for a customer, then no one's going to give you any money for it.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, like that is why we're all here, to build a global business.
I'd love to use this as a jumping point to talk about the industry a little bit, because we are naming this, Tech Leaders Hub Fintech, and well, in this case, specifically talking about insurtech. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. Let's try and marry the two. You're looking at things from a technical perspective. So what do you think is especially either challenging or interesting or rewarding about doing technology specifically for insurance? What are the specific things here to take a look at?
So I mean, this will be true of anything in fintech, which is that working in a regulated environment is challenging. And this is not like, I guess everybody who captures any sort of personal data these days is working under the GDPR regulations, but with like financial regulations as well, there is a lot of other challenges that like come alongside it. And like, whilst those are challenges, they're not insurmountable challenges. The regulations are there, they are fairly clear. Also, the regulators, as long as you're doing like the right thing, they're always like happy to work with you and make sure that things are right. I would say probably the biggest challenge, specifically for insurtech, maybe for fine like banking, I'm not sure. But it's the integrations with the other parts of the system. So, when we started, we didn't have enough cash to write our own insurance. This is motor insurance. You have uncapped liabilities. You you get into the wrong kind of accident and you could be liable for millions of pounds worth of damages. And so we needed to work with existing insurers to underwrite those policies. Working with existing insurers becomes quite challenging when the systems that they want you to integrate with are old and slow moving, and it can be challenging. I know that, so one of the systems, I'm not going to name and shame any of our partners because I actually quite like all of them. One of the systems that we have to integrate with still requires us to FTP fixed length text files onto a server on a regular basis that are named in a sequential order in order to do this integration. where like they have to be ASCII formatted, and the first 16 characters mean X, so you have to like space pad them out, and then the next 16 characters in this file mean another thing, and that's the encoding format. Like the world has moved on in the last 50 years, but this system is like so integral to such large parts of the like insurance industry here in the UK that making changes to it is very, very difficult to do and potentially very risky and expensive. And so we have to integrate with that. And so doing a bunch of these sort of older legacy type of integrations can be really challenging, as well as changing some of the mindsets. So we've been really fortunate to find insurers and to find carrier providers who were bought onto what we were doing and already had the mindset of insurance can be better than what we're offering people. And so we were able to do that. There were a number of insurers we spoke to that just went, no, can't be done.
Oh,
Just, no, can't be done. And we're like, okay, cool. We'll see you in a couple of years' time once we've done it. And that mindset shift is very difficult. That I think is something that over the last 4 or 5 years we've started to see a big change in. I think there's a number of insurtech, I guess, stars around the world. There's a few unicorns now, and we've joined that club. But these insurtech unicorns are really starting to paint a different picture of how the world can be to some of these legacy insurers. And this attitude of like, no, that can't be done is now changing.
Okay, so just to be clear here, because on the one hand, I see that insurtech companies such as yours are fostering this change, or these changes, I can say. But on the other, also the legacy insurers are kind of starting to follow the times a little bit. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean they are. It would, and like it's not a surprise. I would be more surprised if they, didn't see these changes. I probably was more surprised when I joined the industry. Like, no, when we started, it was like, how hard could it be to start an insurance company? And it's like, it's actually really, really hard. And like, I was more surprised when I came in that the attitude was the way it was, and that these people hadn't seen that these changes were coming, than I am now that these people are sort of like seeing how the insurance landscape is changing and seeing the changes that are being driven by disruptors such as ourselves, and are turning around going, hey, we still want to have a business in 50 years time, so we need to make some changes. And I think it's great. Like, we didn't come in here to like be the one and only insurance company in the world. We came in here to make insurance better for everybody. And if like the way that we do that is by encouraging every insurance company to up their game, then we encourage every insurance company to up their game, and the world of insurance gets better for everybody.
Yeah. So I really wonder what how that exactly manifests. So if insurance companies are upping the game, or about to, what will that look like? For example, for the end consumer, where do you think this is all going?
So I think there is a lot of focus on personalization of insurance, and so like some of the larger insurers are now also getting onto things like telematics, and understanding that who someone is and how that person drives are two separate things. You can fit all of your traditional like actuarial points of being, like 45, living in a good neighborhood, not had any accidents, like all of the tick boxes that said you're going to be like really great driver from I'm just going to look at you. And then you get in the car and you drive like an absolute hooligan. And understanding like the difference between like a static data point of like who somebody is and something that they can or can't control, to understanding how they use their vehicle. There's a lot of insurers now starting to pick up on the value of this telematics, and the machine learning and data science that goes behind analyzing that into classifying someone as a good driver or a bad driver. Where we at Zego have an added advantage is not only do we have our own telematics. So last year we acquired a telematics company from Portugal called Drivet, which are some people who've done some amazing work building out telematics capabilities. And so we're incorporating that into our products. But we now understand who someone is from the data that they can give us and the data that we can enrich from different sources like the DVLA. We understand how they use their vehicle. which is like our telematics and our sense app and understanding how someone drives. But on top of that, we get to understand like why someone is using their vehicle. So we get to see like, is this person working for like Deliveroo? Does this person work for both Deliveroo, Uber, and Uber Eats? And like we can see and tell all of these things, and we can understand like not only who someone is, how they're using their vehicle, but why they're using their vehicle, to get a sort of complete 360 view of the actual risk. And if you can properly understand the risk, then you can properly price insurance. Insurance is difficult for lots of reasons. And this is not just insurtech, this is insurance is difficult. It's one of the only products that you have absolutely no idea how much it's going to cost you until 3 years after you've sold it.
Right.
Because you can sell a policy, you can guess that this person is going to like cost you on average £3,000 worth of claims, but you just have no idea. Claims can come in long after the policy has been sold. You have to make as educated decisions as you can.
I see. Yeah, that's really, really true. And I was always very curious about that. It's an interesting business to be in general. I wanted to make one quick note here, because we'll be looking to wrap this up at about the full hour mark. So if there's any questions from you, dear watchers and listeners, that you would like to ask Stu, that would be a great time to ask them, as we are going to be slowly wrapping up. I have one additional question though, and I wonder what you're going to say here, because I'm trying to feel like this, driver, the person at the receiving end of these policies. And on the one hand, I want my insurance to be priced fairly. On the other, I do wonder about the level of scrutiny. Do you ever get feedback about the amount of data that would be collected as part of these? And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing or misusing the word telematics or telemetrics.
Telematics.
Telematics. Okay, yeah. Sorry. So
okay.
Do you ever get any feedback about that, or do you have a personal opinion about how much data is too much data about somebody's driving habits?
So I think that there's no question whatsoever at the moment that data and data privacy are a large part of what the world is talking about. A lot of that comes to, is the person getting value for this data? If we were taking someone's data and analyzing it so that we could serve better ads to them, then I would argue that you're not giving back as much value as you can.
Sure.
What we can get by processing that data is giving people a proper understanding of how they can impact their insurance premiums. Because like it or not, people have to buy insurance. We are selling a product that the government says you have to buy this. So rather than make it feel like a tax or something that people hate, if we can take someone's data and say, using like all of the research that we have and using all of the data science that we can throw behind this, we can tell you exactly how you are impacting your premium. Then I feel like we're actually giving back and giving that value back to the user. This isn't just about like us being able to make more money. This is about us being able to lower premiums for everybody by making sure that people are getting priced fairly. And for us, fairly is like not, hey, as much as we can possibly price people and they will still pay for it. For us, fairly is people are getting priced based on their actual risk.
And
so in that sense, I was gonna say, in that sense, like the more data we can get off someone, the more value we can pass back to them. So I'd like to think that people are happy to give us that data.
Well, they are using the service, so
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think, I can relate on some level, because, well, one thing that I'm getting is if somebody's a great driver, that's going to lower their premium, and obviously they're going to be happy about that. Not too long ago, I was taking out a mortgage myself for, well, this place that I'm in right now. And I also thought the system is not so mature. It was looking at superficial kind of information, just the income and just general data. And then at some point I found myself asking, thinking to myself, I wish they knew a little bit more about what's actually happening here, because I knew I was in a good situation, right? So yeah, to some extent I was wishing they had more data on me, as interesting as that sounds, right? So I can relate to a lot of the points that you made here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with just, again, like I was talking a bit about transparency earlier in a different context, but like as a company, transparency is a big part of what we do, and that transparency goes all the way through to the customer, and it goes about explaining, like, we're not just tracking your location for the sake of tracking your location to see, like, oh, do you drive in a bad part of town? So the reason we're tracking this is so that we can see, like, how fast do you accelerate? How smoothly do you go around corners? How harsh is your braking? And being able to give that back to people to say, like, you are like one of our top drivers. Like, you never use your phone while you're driving. You score 100 out of 100. We never see like phone distraction events when we're analyzing your driving. But like, dude, the way you go around corners, it's like you think you're in a rally car. Do you know what I mean? Like and being able to, like, we probably don't use quite that sort of candid language with people, but being able to give them that kind of feedback, and say, like, the reason your score is low is because of this, and for people to be able to see that and see, like, this is actually how individual bits of data are used and are interpreted and are translated. And like, obviously, we comply with all of the GDPR regulations that, like, I think are fantastic. Like, we started this company in 2016, right before GDPR came into effect, which means it's been in our blood since we started the business. And I'm a big fan of them. Like, I'm a big fan of saying that, like, yes, people should be able to turn around and say, you know what, I'm done. I would like you to delete all of the data that you've got on me. And just, like, as a company, it's like, like, if you don't want to be part of that, if you don't want to get it, then we don't have any right to keep that data. So, we built tools and we built functionality in from the very beginning to make that sort of processes as easy as possible.
Yeah, as a marketer, we also deal with GDPR ourselves too, and despite how it can add a little bit of complexity to our processes, in our work, as a consumer, I'm always glad it's there, and it always feels right to be able to invoke, for example, that right to be forgotten. Please delete me from the database. Do not contact me again, because that's not what I want. So yeah, I totally agree with you here. Okay, so if there are any questions from the watchers, this is the exact last moment while we're wrapping up. And Stu, just before we go off air here, I wanted to give you a little bit of space to make any shout outs you'd like to do, or make any announcements you'd like to do. Maybe you're hiring, whatever you'd like to mention.
We are always hiring. Like I mentioned earlier, alluded to a couple of times, we just raised our Series C. So
congratulations on that.
Thank you. And we are the latest tech unicorn, and I think possibly the 19th, someone was saying, like, tech unicorn in the UK. And it feels amazing. With that comes an awful lot of challenges, an awful lot of exciting work to do. So we're always hiring people. If anyone's out there listening, interested, we have almost every role under the sun available, and open for hiring. So take a look at our careers page and get in touch.
Yeah, you did mention scaling from 800 engineers to 200 engineers. So
from about 8. So I think it's really hard to tell.
Sorry, 80. I said 80. 80 to 200.
We're not like decimating the size of our engineering team.
Sorry.
No, I think we might be at about 87.
Okay.
We just had Chinas start on Monday, who was, I think, the latest new starter, and there's a few people who have signed but haven't started yet. I think we're at about the 87 mark, and the plan is to double in a bit within the next 12 months. So we'll get somewhere close to 200.
Okay, sure. So, if you're interested in that, dear watchers and listeners, as I like to say, and be sure to check that out. Stu, you can, certainly drop a link in the comments under the stream, for example, on LinkedIn. No problem whatsoever. Personally, again, I find myself really, really just happy that, we can be part of that Zego story, of that, UK technology unicorn, with our humble team at STX Next. So I'm really glad that that's happening. What else as we're wrapping up? If you like this, if you're in fintech or otherwise, a tech leader that has thoughts to share, like Stu here, and you'd like to be a guest on our show, just reach out. This is something that you can do, and we can have a great conversation like we just did. I mean, thank you so much, Stu, just for sharing everything that you did today.
I enjoyed chatting with you, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering if there's anything else to add. If you're watching this and you haven't clicked, the reaction buttons, if you haven't shared it, if you haven't commented on it, please do. We will appreciate the support. And checking all of the boxes mentally, I guess that would be it. That's our 1 hour mark. Thank you again, Stu, really for the conversation, and I hope we'll find a way to have you on the show again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And thank you everyone who's watching.
Yeah, thank you everyone to everyone who was watching, and we'll see you at the Tech Leaders Hub, as it is now officially named. We'll see you there next time. I'm gonna click the button now.